Gosh, stop. I love what just happened. I love my mom getting up here doing that. I love our worship team getting up here doing that. I love Amy getting up here and doing that. I love seeing the activity that is taking place in our church. And that's why I love having a small church. I know some people, in ministry, they're like, I want the biggest, the best, I want all of that. And it's like, that's cool. And I talked to you guys last week about how valuable you guys are to me personally. Like, I would take this church over anything because that's how I feel about you guys. And I realized something. The beauty of having a small church is we get to interact as a community on a whole different level. So I've been going to this church since we started it. And Darcy, you've been coming to this church. Well, I don't want to say how long you've been coming to this church. And so I've known Darcy a long time. And we were talking, and her brother-in-law, Billy, is here today with his beautiful wife. And I was like, wait a minute. My birthday buddy is going to be here because me and Billy have the same birthday. And I was like, this is so cool. She's like, you and Billy have the same birthday? I'm like, yeah. And she goes, Billy's birthday is my wedding day. And I was like, oh, what are the chances? That's so cool. That's something I didn't know about her. She goes, yeah. And she told me the year. I go, that's literally my birthday. And she goes, buckle up, here it goes. I got married right here in this church. And I was like, what a small world. But we get that in the small community. And I want to encourage you guys, when you're looking around this congregation, there's people that you don't know, there's things that you don't know. There's power in our conversations. There's power in just hanging out after church, walking around, getting to know each other, really seeing the community. And I want to encourage you guys to do that. If you're new and you're like, oh my gosh, I got to get out of here fast before somebody does that to me, that's fine. But if you've been here a while, linger around. We ain't shutting the doors and kicking anybody out. We want that community. So I would encourage you guys, especially with the events like Amy's saying, getting to know people more like that. So that's really what that small church is really all about, and we appreciate that. So, Darcy, what else are we going to find out, sister? I want to say good morning to all you guys. I want to say good morning to everybody that is back this week. We've had some guys that have been out sick and injured and different things, so it's great to see everybody back here. Great having everybody joining us online. We always appreciate you guys. Preparing this message was a tough one, and I blame Pastor Dan. Last week's sermon. Dude, that was a good sermon. He got done, he walked off the stage. I'm knowing I got to preach the following week, which is right now, and I'm like, how do I follow that? I don't even know what to say to that. And I literally told Dan, I said, that was not your best sermon. Because to say that wouldn't do it justice. I said, that might be one of the best sermons I've heard. I had to give him that credit. Because what he talked about was church hurt. He went into an area that we don't like to go into, and he delivered it masterfully. So I'd like to say to you, if you're dealing with church hurt lurking in your heart, go back and give that sermon a listen. It was really, really powerful, and that is something that we absolutely have to address. So, today, I realized something. I had to up my game. I had to kick it up a notch. And it's not to compete with Dan. No, it has nothing to do with a little brotherly competition. It's because God deserves my best efforts. And you guys deserve my best efforts. So today I will be entering a cheat code at some point during my sermon to take this whole thing to another level. So I'm just putting that out there right now so you guys can be looking for it. If you take notes, today's sermon is titled The Handoff. Was anybody around here in the 90s? Like in the Chicagoland area? Okay, cool. So you're probably a sports fan, right? We all get into sports. The handoff is one of the most influential parts of any sport. You think about when you're watching football, basketball, baseball, soccer. The whole excitement is the movement of the ball towards the goal line, right? And for those of us in the 90s, in Chicago, it was MJ. We're watching the Bulls every time they're playing because why? We wanted to see what kind of points Jordan was going to put on the board and how he was going to do it. There's times he walked away like this. I don't even know what's going on. I throw it in the air and it goes in. And we were loving it. So growing up in Chicago in the 90s, we're watching this, and we had this incredible Jordan moment. It was 1997. This is the NBA Finals. It's Game 6. The Bulls versus Utah Jazz. 3-2. We're up, baby, right? Clock is ticking. 10 seconds to go in the game. It's tied at 86. Who's getting the ball? Jordan. Who always gets the ball? It's Jordan. Why? Because it's going to go in. That's what happens. So Jordan gets the ball. He's running up the court. He's going up the left side. Boom! He gets double teamed. We called it. We knew that was going to happen. He's going to do something amazing, and Jordan does the unthinkable. Pump fake. Here it comes. The pass to Steve Kerr. For a 3? No. Just a 17-footer. He passes to the ball, who's to a guy who's not being guarded. He was one of the league's best shooters. Y'all left a smoking gun unattended. Bulls up by 2. 5th championship in the Jordan era. We lost our minds. It was amazing. Am I right? This was one of those moments where we're all like, yeah, I can't believe this. And it wouldn't have happened except because what happened was a year earlier, Michael Jordan and Steve Kerr got into a physical altercation during practice because Jordan was mad. He said the team's not pulling their weight. So in practice, he's playing extreme Jordan defense. Kerr gets in his face. Michael pops him. Michael had to apologize to Steve. Now, if he had not apologized, we might not have ever had that amazing moment. There was a hurt that needed healing, and because of that, we have this game-winning handoff moment. What makes this story stick out isn't the pass itself, but the surrounding circumstances. When we know the history, it makes it more exciting. What makes it also more exciting is it's a championship. This was a battle, and that's what made this front page newsworthy. You know what isn't front page newsworthy? When I go to Culver's and my daughter can't finish her double bacon butter burger with cheese, and she passes it off to dear old dad for the assist. There's no fight. It's expected. Do you know how many times that's happened? It's old news. There's no challenge in that one. In my last sermon, I spoke about the prophet Elijah. You guys remember Elijah? Okay. Elijah faced epic trials. His life was on the line countless times. He was miraculously fed by ravens. He brought the dead back to life. He called fire down from heaven in an amazing, simple prayer. And if all that wasn't enough, he was suddenly taken up to heaven in a whirlwind by a chariot of fire and horses of fire. Man, that must have been a dry desert. Even the horses are on fire. Come on, that was a lame joke. Give me a little more on that. When I said horses are on fire because it's a dry desert. So his life was epic. His story is legendary. And most importantly, his fight was real. So I want to take a look at what happened right before Elijah was taken up in a chariot of fire. In 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 8, Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the water with it. The water divided to the left and to the right. And the two of them crossed over on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me what I can do for you before I am taken from you." So he knows what's about to happen. "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit," Elisha replied. "You have asked a difficult thing," Elijah said. "Yet if you see me when I'm taken from you, it will be yours. Otherwise, it will not." I just love the transparency here. You see it? You're good. You don't? Too bad. Not mincing words. So when I read this, I'm thinking, if this was the NFL, this would be that moment where the ball is thrown in the air and it's just hovering there for a Hail Mary pass. The wide receiver is on a full sprint down the field, and the fans are screaming what everybody wants to know, will he make the catch? Is Elisha going to see Elijah taken? Let's find out. 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 12. Elisha saw this, and he cried out, my father, the chariots and the horsemen of Israel. And Elisha saw him no more. Then he took hold of his garment and tore it in two. And that means that he was upset that he was losing Elijah because he was like a father to him. He had that father figure. Elisha then picked up Elijah's cloak. I know the names are a little tricky. So Elisha picks up Elijah's cloak that had fallen from him and went back and stood at the bank of the Jordan. He took the cloak that had fallen from Elijah and struck the water with it. Where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah, he asked. When he struck the water, it divided to the right and to the left, and he crossed over. He makes the catch. The mantle has been passed. The God of Elijah is also the God of Elisha. Can you imagine what that felt like in that moment when he saw the waters part? There's a lot going on right here. He asked a huge thing. He doesn't know if he's going to get it. I can't imagine that moment. You just see it spread, and you're like, is this happening? The waters have parted? I got it? Here's the best part. During Elisha's ministry, he literally did double the miracles Elijah did, just like he had asked. But none of that would have happened if Elijah didn't hand it off. He could have hoarded it for himself. He could have held on to it. And what would have happened if he had done that? No chariots of fire, no horses of fire, no double the miracles. What I love is Elijah didn't pick Elisha based on what Elisha had already done. Elisha hadn't done nothing yet. He simply obeyed God because he knew firsthand God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. And this reminds me of our dear friend Gina that recently passed. Gina, my mom mentioned it, she volunteered in our tech ministry as well as the cleaning ministry. And I'm going to say something, and it's going to sound offensive, but I want you to hear the whole thing I have to say. Gina did not have a can-do attitude. She had something better. She had a will-do spirit. You hear what I'm saying? She had a willingness to do what she wasn't sure she could do. I love that. For the rest of my life, whenever I hear the name Gina, I am thinking willing spirit. Because there's times we had some chaos up in the tech booth, and she didn't know what was going on, and we worked through it, and it was opportunity for God to come in. She got through it. And I loved that she didn't panic and run. I love that she stuck it out because she saw the value in what she was doing up there. Each one of us here today is in the position of either an Elijah getting ready to make the handoff or an Elisha getting ready to receive it. It's so important for us to be conscious of this because this is the process of how Christianity has been passed down from generation to generation. And just to give you a glimpse of generation to generation, my grandpa and grandma passed it off to my mom passed it off to me, and both my kids are doing ministry here this morning today. That's what we want to see. We want to see that continuing generation after generation. What really got me thinking about this was somebody has prayed for us. Somebody has cried for us. Somebody has ached for us. Somebody has fought for us. We are called to do the same for somebody else. So I want you guys to really receive that this morning. So I have a very big question. How many of you are like Elijah and have an epic fight story?
I have a good story, too.
Well,
there's lots of different types of stories. We've got comedy stories. We've got dramas. If I had to choose my favorite type of story, it would be hands down a good old David and Goliath story. There's something about the little guy winning. There's something about the impossible becoming possible. I also look at life like it's a book full of short stories. Every chapter is just another story. When I look back at my book, unfortunately, a lot of the chapters are David and Goliath type of stories. Kind of feels like I've been David my whole life. I got so used to fighting Goliath that it didn't bother me anymore. Going through life, another giant gets in my way, that's fine, let's do this. Then I came across a Goliath the likes of which I had never seen before. And it was a Goliath that I couldn't beat. I tried, but I just couldn't get the job done. And that brings us to today's story. Once upon a time, in a land not so far away at all. I'd like to thank the one other person that found that funny. I worked on that joke, so I appreciate you. But in this not so far away land, I was once married. And unfortunately, in this land, I had went through a divorce. And I remember talking to my kids, explaining to them what was going on. They made it very clear, and they were very vocal that they wanted to live with me, and I had no problem with that. It's the one thing about life that kind of sucks, right? Like, you can have it all planned out, and then life will turn left on you. And that's what it did. I mean, things got really messy really quick. I've heard people say when you pray, you just pray. Don't go trying to make a deal with God or anything like that. Just pray. I struggle with the listening part sometimes. I remember I used to pray to God, and I told him, like, I would give away every dime I have. Every possession I have, I'd give it all up. I just want my kids. I told my lawyer the same thing. I'm not trying to argue over beds, pots, pans. She can have all the spoons. I don't care. I just want my kids. At the end of the divorce, I had one full placement of my daughter and all that. And after that, all I had was a dented, rusted-up minivan and $7 in change in my bank account. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know how I was going to make things work. But I try to live my life one step at a time and trust that God will build the staircase as I go. Now, at this time, some people may, and some people even advise that I take $7 and put it in my gas tank and ride off into the sunset with my daughter. For them, it was over, and I had won. I couldn't just walk away. I didn't feel victorious. And not only was it not done, but the hardest battle hadn't even begun. When I first met my ex-wife, she had a child already, a little 10-month-old baby boy. Some of you guys have heard some of my stories and know that I grew up in foster care and I was adopted and all that stuff. And I believe through my childhood, I learned that blood's thicker than water, but love is always stronger. So it was nothing for me to take this little guy under my wing and raise him like my own. And that's exactly what I did. For over a decade, from building box forts to coaching basketball teams, I was dad. He was also very vocal about wanting to live with me, and I had no problem with that. But the other parties involved didn't like that idea at all, for whatever reasons. And because he wasn't biologically my kid, I had no rights, I had no say. So when people decided to go off the deep end, they drug him with. I remember for almost a year, I used to drive over 600 miles a month to get him every other weekend. This is over 600 miles a month in a busted minivan. Like, I used to pray, like, God, let us get there and back one more time. And we did. I remember one time he was over for the weekend, and he asked me, he was like, how come Annabelle gets to live a good life and I don't? It broke my heart. I hate the sense of feeling helpless. See, while all this was going on, I talked to my lawyer about him, and he said it was just a waste of money. That what I was trying to do was noble, but things just don't work that way. I called other lawyers, and the answer was the same. I called various family agencies because somebody had to know something. And no matter who I called, the answer was always the same, that there was nothing for me. I learned that sometimes in life, there won't be a path. There won't be a diagram or a blueprint to follow. Shortly after that, I got a text saying, if you want them, come get them. And I did. That ride home was just like a mix of emotions for me, right? Like I was happy because my boy is coming home. But for how long? A couple days, a couple weeks, a couple months till someone changes their mind? They only sent them with 2 outfits. Now I got to try to figure out how to get clothes. Can I even enroll them in school? Do I start asking for forgiveness instead of permission? I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know how I was going to make it work. But I try to live my life one step at a time and pray that God will build the staircase as I go. Shortly after, I got an unexpected conversation with an unexpected friend. He was like, hey, we got someone we want you to talk to. I think she can help. She was a lawyer, and I had a good conversation with her. She had ideas. She was the first person who had a plan that I talked to. I called my buddy back, and I was like, man, I appreciate that. She gave me some good ideas. I'm going to try to get some paperwork together. And he was like, well, you're not just going to run with her and let her do all that? I had asked her about retainer fees and all that, and you could have been asking me for $1 million. You're going to get the same way. I mean, I hadn't even begun the rebuilding process. I was still sifting through the rubble trying to salvage things. But I didn't know exactly what was going on at the time, and I knew I didn't know exactly what was going on because he was like, Josh, I don't think you understand exactly what's going on right now. His family talked about it, prayed about it, talked about it, and prayed about it some more. And they had come to the idea that God was telling them to help me. He said, if you want to fight, we can get you in the ring. And in the long run, that's all we really want is an opportunity to lose. Because at this point, I'm just stuck on the sideline. At least let me take the field and get crushed. I go home and I tell my son, we got a great opportunity coming up, but there are things we need to talk about. I went through a similar situation when I was younger. I wanted to stay with my foster parents. I didn't want to go home. And I had to get up in court and talk and do all these things that, looking back, isn't a good place for a child to be at. So me and my son, we drew plenty of lines on how far we're willing to take this. I also explained to him that once we open this door, the flood will come and there's no way we can close it. People are going to be upset. People are going to get mad. But we also decided that our current living situation wasn't built for longevity either. So we decided to move forward. Step one was to go through emergency guardianship hearing, right? Malara said she filed for emergency hearing. In a couple days, we'll go there and we'll try to get emergency guardianship, and I was cool with that. It sounded simple. But nothing in life really is that simple. The night before court, I get a knock on the door, and when I answer it, it's one of the other parties involved with a stack of paperwork and the police. I don't have any paperwork. I don't have any rights. I have a court date. And I begged the cops. I was just like, we got like 18 hours till court, man. Just let the judge make the decision. The officer on duty didn't know what to do. So he called his supervisor who didn't know what to do, who called someone else, who called someone else. It got to the point where they called the DA at night to ask him what to do. And he said, well, there must be a reason for the season. As long as everything looks good, leave everything alone. And they did. The next day we go to court, and the judge has no idea what's going on. She says she needs time to kind of figure out what's going on. Investigations need to happen, all kinds of stuff. And because I had him in school already and we're doing our thing, she said to keep everything the same. Everything just stay where it's at till she figures that out. We'll figure it out. So I was awarded emergency guardianship of my son. And I'll be honest, man, you couldn't tell me I wasn't the man that day. I was walking around feeling great because we were doing it. Like this was going to happen. But life can be a roller coaster. And with every roller coaster, after the rise comes the fall. And we fell hard. All of our plans fell apart. Everything we wanted to have happen didn't. Court date after court date, things look worse and worse and worse. I was told that when I do lose, I would never see him again. I was all in with a really bad hand. See, I'm not a lawyer by any means, but I think I'm smart enough to know when things aren't going well. So a week before the last court date, I talked to my lawyer, and I was just like, just level with me. Tell me what's going on here. She said that there's always a chance, right? But the responsible thing for me to do is talk to my son and prepare him for an unfavorable verdict, which is kind of like lawyer talk for you about to lose, right? Now, we've all had conversations with our kids that are awkward, they're uncomfortable, but we do it because we want our kids to learn from us and not the world. But to go over multiple fallout plans with your child in case communication is cut off, man, that sucks, right? We had a few different plans, a few different ideas, and we'd probably do a combination of the few. The first initial plan was the easiest. I wouldn't do anything. I wouldn't change jobs. I wouldn't move. I wouldn't go anywhere. That way, when he turned 18, he wouldn't have to look for me because I'd be right where I was when he left. Sometimes you don't know how strong you are until being strong is the only option you have. And sometimes when you look at situations in your life, you see it differently because it's just too hard to see it all when you're going through it. And when I look back at this chapter of my life, it was definitely a David and Goliath chapter. But I was wrong about something. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't David. This story is not about me. 2 days before the last court date, we got all kinds of people everywhere. I mean, any case that involves a child, a lot of agencies just get involved, and that's a great thing. And I believe they're all trying to do the same thing I was trying to do, and that's brace him for the impact of the inevitable. But it was at this time that the plans changed. Now, I wasn't comfortable. I'm a stick-to-the-plan kind of guy. So I don't do well with adjustments. So when people decided to change the plan, I was very uncomfortable. But I let it happen because I was out of options. May 11th is a day I'll never forget. It's kind of like sitting on death row and you're just waiting to get to that day with the circle because I was going to take one to the heart that day. I'll never forget how I felt when the judge gave her official ruling. I remember I was sitting in court, me, my son, my friend Jason, and the judge decided she wanted to award me guardianship of my child until he's 18. And we had did it. The impossible had become possible. Now, I won't get into too many details of those last few days, but I will say this. My son was able to do in less than 48 hours what I had failed to do in over a year. But I think it's natural as parents, we want to protect our kids. We want to get in the way of whatever's trying to hurt them. But I'm learning, and I'm realizing, especially as my kids get older, that sometimes the best thing we can do as a parent is to supply the sling and a lot of stones. And I'll be honest with you guys, I still have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know how the ball keeps rolling. But I just try to live my life one step at a time and pray that God will build the staircase as I go. Now, we've all heard the phrases, a picture's worth 1,000 words, and sometimes that's true. So I just have a real quick little video I want you guys to see that will be able to say more than I ever could.
He ain't my blood, ain't got my name, but if he did, I'd feel the same. I wasn't there for his first steps, but I ain't missed a ball game yet. son, and that's my choice. He ain't my blood, but he's my boy.
The young man that you guys seen in those photos is my son Damien, and he is my favorite David and Goliath story. The end. Thank you.
The cheat code. I literally did a handoff in the middle of a sermon titled The Handoff about a handoff. Yeah, let's hear it for Josh, Annabelle, Damien. You know, I started off with talking about Darcy and getting to know, her even a little bit better. Now you guys got to know Josh and the family a little bit better. What's funny is when we were first talking about this, I asked Josh to do that. That was all planned, by the way, in case you're like, oh. Because Josh and I worked together, and it was funny. I was like, you want to tell your story? Because like I said, I got to be there and watch the whole thing unfold day after day. And he's like, man, it's going to be tough. It's very emotional and this and that. And I was like, yeah, tell me about it. It's going to be extremely emotional for me. Because I was like, here's why. Because his story is our story. And I was like, yeah, it's going to be a difficult one for you to tell. But it's going to be important because you are going to hit each person here where they can really feel it. And that unifies us. That really helps us to begin to understand each other as a community. And man, I was sitting there crying. I was like, man, I hope my face dries before I have to get back up there. But I'll never forget the day we were at work and he told me, he goes, Damien did it. And I was like, wow. I mean, there's noise all around us, but it was just me and him in the room at that time. And it was like, God did it. Damien and God did it. That was just an unbelievable moment. Something that really hit me was for the battle to be fought properly and for the handoff to be done right, Josh had to obey the toughest scripture in the Bible for a parent to obey. Exodus 14:14, the Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. I have quite a bit left in my sermon. I didn't know, I just gave Josh an open ticket. I didn't know how long it would go, if it was going to be long or short, and I wanted him to have plenty of time to share what he wanted to share. But he was talking about David and Goliath, and I just want to share this with you real quick, and then I'm going to invite the worship team up. In the story of David and Goliath, it's in 1 Samuel chapter 17. David's on the battle lines. It's him and Saul. Saul's the king, and they said, David's like, I'm going to go do this fight. And everybody's like, this is ridiculous. You're a shepherd boy. What can you possibly do? Well, if you're going to do that, at least put on Saul's armor, because David doesn't have his own armor. David had been fighting his whole life the way that God had trained him to fight for the circumstances that he was in. Saul's armor was for how Saul fought his battles. So it's Saul's armor, not David's. So David puts it on and he tries to move around and he's like, this is ridiculous. And I love the imagery. I'm picturing like when my kids were little and they'd put my shirt on or my hoodie on and they're swimming in it. And it's like, can I wear this to school? It's like, no, you look ridiculous. And David did look ridiculous. And it looked ridiculous for a purpose because that was not what he was called to do. Saul could have forced him. I'm the king. You have to wear it. Josh could have said, Damien, the adults are talking here. But instead he said, all right, I've already heard from God. I need you to have this experience so you can hear from God. And when I picture this story and I picture David standing out there, it's him and the army, him and the giant. And he's got that pouch, and he's got 5 stones, and he's got his sling, and it looks ridiculous. He's vulnerable. I mean, to human eyes, this looks terrible. This is going to be a slaughter. But to every one of us who's been in this opportunity, we are where we are because we've had the testimony personally for God to aid our stone, for God to aid us in the battle. And it's very, very, very important for us as a church, as Christians, as people who've been hurt by the church, for the healing process to take place, we have to trust God to let somebody else step into that position, to let Him be their way maker the same way He's been our way maker. You guys hear where we're coming from this morning? So I am going to invite the worship team to come up. But what I want to encourage you guys today to do is I want you to think about Josh's story. I want you to ask yourself, what stands out to me in this story? Ask yourself, who am I in this story? And then I want you to take a minute and I want you to think about Elijah and Elisha. I want you to think about your connection to the church. I want you to think about where you are in ministry. I want you to just think about the people around you and ask yourself, am I an Elijah? Is it time for me to hand things over so God can take me somewhere else or into something else or onto other things? Or is it time for me to open my hands and step up and step into a place where there is a need? And you heard it from Josh. Josh is not the pastor of the church. And look how influential his story is this morning. And I want you to understand, that's how influential your story is. It might be a different story than what he told, but it's still powerful. And as Christians, we have to be confident in what God has done in our lives and what God's about to do in our lives, and we got to be bold to share what's taken place. So I'm going to pray, and I want to just encourage you guys as we're closing this morning, just think about those things. And be bold in your prayer. Say, all right, God, am I letting go? Am I taking hold? Is it both? But let God know, hey, I'm here for the fight. I'm not going anywhere. You called me to it, I'm going to do it. Heavenly Father, we thank you for Josh's testimony. We thank you for Damien and Annabelle. We thank you for Josh's boldness to get up and share with us this morning. We thank you for his heart that mimics the Father in heaven's heart for his children. We pray a blessing over their lives. We pray a blessing over their home. And I just pray for each one here right now, God, that you would open our eyes. God, you're doing something great in this church. You're pushing us out there to shed your light. So we just pray, Lord, that you would give us wisdom and discernment. Is it time to let go and step up and step on? Is it time to take on something new? And Lord, just give us the boldness to do it. We ask this in Jesus' name. And everybody said,